Hello and welcome to Kraken Krakoa number 20. This is an Excalibur number 2 review, Druids, Dragons, and Dreams, oh my. Welcome to Comic Book Herald's X-Men reviews. Today again we're going into Excalibur number 2 by Tini, Howard, Marcus To, Tom Mueller on designs as I continue to explore all the exciting elements of the exciting Dawn of X. Spoilers for Excalibur number 2 will follow as today I answer, what's Apocalypse's plan in Excalibur? How is Excalibur fitting into or not fitting into Dawn of X? And who the heck is Baby Shogo? What's Apocalypse's plan in Excalibur? Issue opens with the new Excalibur lineup claiming a new lighthouse. They arrive via ship sailed by the Marauders' own Kate Pryde, herself a founding member of Excalibur, which is a nice little tie-in and touch back to the original series. Kate Pryde sailing Excalibur to their lighthouse is a nice Marauders crossover, and her humor is a definite highlight in this issue, if perhaps out of place and a little forced, given Rogue's coma and Gambit's very surly attitude towards his wife in a coma. Understandable. The Braddock Lighthouse was the central operating base during the original Claremont Davis run from the 80s. More than a simple lighthouse, this was connected to the Omniverse and allowed travel between realities, which I expect to play into this new Krakoan lighthouse as well. Most recently, we'd actually seen Brian Braddock and Megan living in the rebuilt lighthouse with their baby daughter, prior to Brian's capture in Otherworld, of course, during X-Men Gold Annual Number 1. This new lighthouse seems just as mystical, if not more so, and is mysteriously connected to Rogue, who remains comatose and encased in Otherworld flowers. Since Excalibur number 1, she appears to be lighting this brand new lighthouse. The journey and formation of the new lighthouse is fraught with complications. The team is attacked by undersea monsters that reminded me of like drowners from the Witcher franchise. On their way there, once they're there, the island is full of invisible druids and of course the witches of Coven Akaba, who are tied to Apocalypse. I'm not super feeling the non-apocalypse parts of Excalibur, specifically in Excalibur number 2, but fortunately this issue is very apocalypse heavy. Speaking of which, it would seem Betsy Braddock, the new Captain Britain, is beginning to suspect Apocalypse as more of the manipulator that we'd expect, and she's questioning his involvement with Coven Akaba in particular, whether or not he's intentionally setting off their attacks. Apocalypse insists that Betsy, Gambit, Jubilee travel to Otherworld to rescue Brian Braddock from Morgan Le Fay, who captured him there in Excalibur number 1. Again, Coven Akaba is built up as this sort of cult of witches dedicating their lives to Apocalypse. We haven't gotten much personality or super like in-depth understanding. You know, we got a little allusion to that with one of their members sort of joining the Coven in Excalibur number 1, but there's no more of that developed here. I'm curious to see as Excalibur progresses if this Akaba clan will get fleshed out a little bit more, because I'd like to understand their ties to Apocalypse, their history, and kind of what it is they're doing. Are they just acting at the behest of Morgan Le Fay here? So what's our Magic Man Apocalypse doing in these pages? The Krakoan in the Grimoire chart reads from left to right, starting at the bottom of the chart and moving up, Gate, Pinnacle, and Nadir. It's frankly pretty straightforward. This appears to be straightforward, an attempt to power a gate, to transfer this gate coming out of the lighthouse that Excalibur just founded. Apocalypse's note alludes to a flashback we see in this issue as well from centuries ago, where very early mutants who met a very early demise at the bottom of the sea. Apocalypse deemed them unworthy at the time, but now in his magics recognizes perhaps a source of power he can leverage for Gates transcending realities. Specifically, it does seem very relevant that the long-deceased twins from the opening of Excalibur number 2, that their power is to never be lost, that they always can find their way. That seems like a very useful power set to have literally crystallized when you're designing a magical lighthouse to traverse dimensions. If all of this, lighthouse design and Apocalypse's magics is building towards, again, Excalibur being able to travel between worlds, between realities, this could be a series I'm very into, because that idea is sort of Exiles meets Multiversity style thing with Apocalypse pulling the strings is really exciting to me. Apocalypse also has plans, it would seem, for sweet baby Shogo, Jubilee's adopted son. The first two issues have repeatedly mentioned Jubilee's fear of Apocalypse babysitting her adopted son, and while I assume this was more for comedic effect than anything, Apocalypse babysitting, there's been enough repetition, dream sequence, and ultimately a turn for Shogo here at the end of this issue that suggests Shogo may actually be a real part of Apocalypse's plans. This moment also alludes to, in Excalibur number 2, everyone gets, or at least Jubilee and Captain Britain that I remember, get a dream sequence. The pacing of these I thought was mildly confusing, honestly. Like, I guess it was clear everyone was going to bed, and lo and behold, now we're in a dream state. But I didn't think this was super clear from the art. I like what Marcus Toe and Tini Howard are doing here generally, but Excalibur 2, there was a downside to me. These dream sequences, I guess because it's so early in the series especially, there's not enough meaning and there's not enough to grasp onto, which I guess in many ways is the nature of dreams. And again, with Shogo, Apocalypse has plans for him. We at least get some development on that here, in that Excalibur number 2 ends with Shogo seemingly turned into a dragon as Jubilee, Captain Britain, and Gambit all travel to Otherworld. Now, there are a couple other transformations here in that Jubilee and Gambit's attire becomes sort of otherworldly. It kind of transfers to the state of being, I don't know, in battle on Otherworld, where they are obviously going to travel and try to rescue Brian Braddock from the clutches of Morgan Le Fay and inevitably encounter the White Witch that was teased in Excalibur number 1, who I still believe to be Saturnine. I think that makes the most sense from Excalibur lore. There is the possibility now, I think, a White Witch could mean something related to the characters of Arakko that we saw in X-Men number 2 and the Summoners, because obviously those are very white-designed characters as well. So Shogo's a dragon now, and given that that's the big tease that Excalibur number 2 ends on, I did want to address, who is Shogo? Let me quote from Shogo's Wikipedia page to tell you how bonkers Shogo's origins are. When the sentient bacteria Archaea traveled to Earth seeking revenge on her brother Sublime, she used a series of asteroids and meteors as her mode of transportation back to Earth. That's the opening sentence to tell you who Shogo is, and it tells you nothing about who Shogo is. The simple answer, though, is Shogo is orphaned by a meteor strike, not a media strike. The television stations and radio personalities did not walk out and orphan a child. Fortunately, instead it was, unfortunately, meteors. He's adopted by Jubilee, who was mostly a vampire while raising him. But seemingly that got better here in Krakoa. This all happens in X-Men number 4 by Wood and Koipel. I'll also call out that before now, Shogo has been known to be human. So this was actually a question that some Kraken Krakoa viewers here on the YouTube channel were wondering if he's human. Can he be on Krakoa, this island for mutants only? That seems to have been answered with a pretty definitive, like, hey, if you're a mutant who has a human baby, Jubilee in this case, an adopted human baby, you don't have to give up your baby in order to live on Krakoa, which seems like a pretty reasonable policy. But the fact that he is human, I think, is relevant for our purposes, because if he is purely human, one, why is Apocalypse seemingly so interested, or at least Jubilee is so worried about how interested Apocalypse might be in this baby? And two, why did he turn into a dragon when they transported realities? That seems super relevant. There has to be more of an explanation there, because lots of X-Men characters, lots of mutants, and humans for that matter, have traveled back and forth between our reality and Otherworld before, and they don't all just turn into dragons. That is actually very, very atypical. So all in all, Excalibur number 2, it was kind of a disappointment to me. I think it's fine. It's a fine comic. And one thing, because House of X and Powers of 10 were so exciting, and because I'm such a big fan of Jonathan Hickman's comic book work, both at Marvel and elsewhere, I'm treating the Dawn of X with a certain gravity, a certain, importance that I would not treat like just every comic coming out of Marvel, right? Like, it's this big moment in X-Men history here, throughout the kind of like back half of 2019, and now the Dawn of X, where it's like things are changing. And of course, what this means is we've got 2 issues, which is nothing to go on, in comic book terms. There's a lot of potential here still in the series. Like I said, Apocalypse setting up sort of a magical gateway to travel between dimensions, this impending battle between Morgan Le Fay and the forces of Otherworld. All that stuff is really, really interesting to me. I think specifically this issue, it just felt like the progress of X-Men, it's starting to crawl into familiar patterns. Things are slowing down in a lot of ways because they have to. I acknowledge that. But things are slowing down, getting a little muddy, getting a little messy, not necessarily hitting like I have to read this immediately status. Ironically, Excalibur, at least in this issue, is losing a little bit of the magic. It's the kind of issue that got me kind of melancholy thinking about the inevitable dip from the peaks of House of X and Powers of 10 fever. It's an unreasonable standard to want to hold all of these issues to. But Excalibur number 2 kind of just got me feeling like, oh, it's just fine. And just fine is pretty disappointing for where Dawn of X and, the world of X-Men has been. So this week, I definitely preferred Marauders number 2 and the sort of madcap energy that comic brings. Excalibur, I still think has a ton of potential, and I'm sticking with the series for sure to see where it goes, because I also think there's going to be overlap. We've got traveling between realities, and probably like most importantly for our purposes, we've got like innate connections to Arakko and the Summoners potentially, and Apocalypse. So like this is going to come back to X-Men, which I'm still loving, by Hickman and Lionel Francis Yu. It's going to matter, or at least it has the potential to really matter. So I would say if you're keeping up with Dawn of X, definitely don't give up on the book yet, but keep your expectations tempered until we have more to go on with this one, because right now, it's not knocking things out of the park. And part of the struggle there too is, like I said, there's one character right now that I'm very interested in, and that's Apocalypse, and everything's happening with him as this sort of legendary magical wizard, with mutant incredible powers. Like Captain Britain, she's gotten the most development, but there's still a long way to go there. Rogue's in a coma, who's probably otherwise my favorite character. And then Jubilee and Gambit, they haven't had a ton to do aside from worrying about those that they love. So there's still potential. We'll see where it goes. This issue didn't blow me away. I'm curious to hear what you think. If you're watching via the YouTube channel, first, please consider liking and subscribing. Leave a comment what you're thinking about Excalibur so far, what you're thinking about Dawn of X in general. If you listen to the podcast, Best Comics Ever, please subscribe to Comic Book Herald's Best Comics Ever. Consider rating and reviewing. Or as always, you can find my work over on comicbookherald.com, including reading orders. I'll include the show notes for all of Dawn of X. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the comics.